Hey, Zach, what's up, man?
How you doing, John?
I'm great. What's up?
Oh, I'm doing good. I'm excited to talk to you. I respect what you're doing. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you, brother. What's up, man?
So my question is, how do I navigate and I guess work through and really come to a more common ground with political issues, specifically with my wife?
Probably have your eardrums surgically removed. That'd probably be the best thing for both of y'all. Hey, if you figure this out, man, you should write that book because you'll sell 1 trillion copies. What's going on in your house?
So we have a great household. I mean, I want to start there. I mean, I love my wife. We have a great relationship. But kind of like you talk about when you have kids, kind of everything changes. And so we had a daughter 8 months ago, which has been awesome.
Congrats, man.
But through that process, thank you. Through that process, me more specifically, I've kind of started to want to come to more of a common ground on some of these issues and present more of a united front as we start to raise our daughter.
Okay, real quick, she's 8 months old, right?
Yes.
You're good for a while. You're good. You're good.
Fair.
My kids are 14 and 8, and you know who my wife voted for last time?
I don't.
I don't either.
Okay.
I don't. I literally don't know. She has a sense of who I voted for, but I have no idea who she voted for because we don't talk about it. And part of that is kind of a move, so I can tell people when they're like, "Who did you vote for?" I can say, "Dude, I didn't even tell my wife." Like that is a thing. We talk about issues, and we talk about how our home is going to feel and what kind of people we are going to be. And that's the difference between values and beliefs, right? Like we share very similar values. Our beliefs are going to be all over the place. And I want her beliefs to change as she learns new things over the course of her lifetime, and me too. That's why we read books, we listen to podcasts. That's why we have conversations with great friends and with cool mentors so I can learn new things. Because if I just hang out with people who believe what I believe, what a lame life. That's a boring life. Right? So give me an example of an issue that you feel is already dividing your household with an 8-month-old.
No, and I appreciate all of those things, and I agree. For me, it's less about who we're voting for and more about, I guess, specific issues. So
give me one. Let's have some fun and make everybody uncomfortable.
Yeah, so one example is specifically with the issue of the Second Amendment.
Okay.
I grew up in Salt Lake City. She grew up in San Diego.
Okay.
And so obviously very polar opposite views and opinions on that, and just a general uncomfortableness for her.
So she doesn't like having a gun in the house with a kid there.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a very common conversation. I'm from Texas. I've even heard it in Texas. When Texans marry foreigners, like somebody from California or somebody from Seattle, right? That kind of foreigner. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that my whole life. So tell me how the conversation goes in your home. Like it was probably cool theoretically until a little baby walked in, right?
To be honest with you, she's never been comfortable with it.
Okay.
But it's been more of an issue since the baby, definitely.
Okay.
And so my question for you more is like, how do I have a conversation? It seems to be really emotional for her, which I understand, and I try and navigate that, but we have a hard time making progress because it just becomes really, really emotional.
Sure.
And we can't really like work through. I guess, that it just gets really emotional is where it kind of comes to a head, and it doesn't make good progress.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember so I'm glad you brought this one up because gun stuff is a touchy subject all across the board, right? And I remember a college professor of mine, she brought this up, and the way she said this was a light bulb moment for me. So the challenge with the gun conversation. Now, this is before all the mass shootings, and they were so commonplace, right? But so I want to add that variable because I get that elevates things, no question about it. I've been in a school during an active shooter experience. Like I get it; it's terrifying. She said the problem with the conversation in the country is when someone says, like, you shouldn't have guns, people maybe in Texas or in Tennessee or in Salt Lake City, they picture their grandmother, right? Like, my grandmother may have grown up on a chicken farm and had to shoot varmints with the 410, right? But the idea, like, what do you mean? You're talking about my grandmother. And your grandmother may have a tiny little, like 380 in her purse. Whereas in maybe Chicago or maybe in San Diego, I don't know anybody with a gun. I don't know anybody who has one. The only people I see are on the news, and they're doing horrible, awful things with them, right?
Yeah.
And so you end up talking past each other. So I always want to get to the issue beneath the issue here. Because the idea of a gun is third rail, right?
Yeah.
My guess is she wants her house to be safe. And my guess is you want your house to be safe. Is that fair?
Very, very fair.
How would y'all go about having that conversation? Because that feels like a different conversation. And here's what I mean. What must be true? Is it gun safes and locks and digital, fingerprint boxes and things like that? Are there places or are there avenues you could take so that your wife would feel safe? Classes y'all could take together? Like, is there things that could happen so that she feels safe? Or the other side of that is, are there things that could be in place in your house without a gun that you would feel safe? That's the real question here.
Yes.
Is that possible?
Definitely.
Tell me another one.
We talk often about how to navigate the conversation, surrounding the gender ideology of these days, and that also seems to get pretty emotional.
How so?
More specifically, I guess it always comes to a head about what is okay and what is not, and kind of how we want to present that in our household. And we've had a hard time coming to an agreement on how we want that discussion to go in the future.
You're kind of talking high level. Be really specific. Your wife wants to what versus what you want to do?
My wife is very inclusive of all different gender ideologies and those types of things, which is, she's amazing and compassionate, and I'm a little bit more traditional on some of those opinions. And that seems to always come to a head as far as, how we want to present that moving forward. But, that goes back to the start. We have a lot of time to...
Yeah, you got plenty of time on that one. The one thing to remember about kids is they hold way less baggage on stuff. They don't have it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I remember, in my mom's lifetime, when she got married, she was not allowed to go to the bank and get a mortgage on her own without my dad's signature. This is in 1970, by the way. She wasn't allowed. And so for her, in 73, I think it was, when the court case came through and she was allowed to get her own checking account. That was a landmark event for her. It was a landmark event for my dad. It was a landmark event for our family. It was a landmark event for our culture. It never occurred to my sister that she could not have a checking account when she became 13 and started babysitting or whatever. That makes sense? And so when my mom sat down to say, like, okay, now here's the deal. Here's what a checking account is. My sister didn't get the baggage behind that because it's something that my mom had not been able to be a part of for so long. Or in my lifetime, gay marriage was not a thing, and now it is. And I remember, like, my son was 4 or 5, and we were going somewhere, and we had some friends over, and they were married, and it was 2 women, and he said, 2 women can get married? And I said, yep. And I was bracing for it. I was like, all right, here's the conversation. And he goes, hey, can we go get, and it went right past, because he didn't have that same heat on it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so I think what's important is to find out what the values are and what we're trying to communicate, and to understand that they don't have that same heat on it. And you mentioned something that I want to double click on. You said, my wife is very compassionate and I'm traditional. I don't think traditional values have to be absent compassion. And I don't think compassion has to be absent common sense when it comes to things like gender identity and things like that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So let me ask you this.
Okay.
I feel like I am guilty of making these things more of a debate. And in turn, she's guilty of making them very emotional. And it's hard to have progress with those two ways of going. How
long have y'all been
how
married?
do I do a better job of that? 3 years.
Okay. All right. Speaking of gender, I'm going to overly gender this in a way that's not fair, and people are going to be mean to me on the YouTube comments, and that's fine. This isn't for everybody, but this is just seems to be a generalization, like inside the bell curve, or inside like one standard deviation inside the bell curve. Often, men like to solve things with facts. Let's get to these facts, let's debate these facts, and let's move on. And often, one standard deviation with inside that bell curve, women like to be seen and heard and experienced. So possibly, she sits down and says, I want to make sure our daughter knows her two pronouns, that she's a he, her, okay? And you might say, well, duh, she is a young girl, and you rattle off a bunch of facts. And it may be that your wife is saying, the thought of my daughter being ostracized in school makes me so sick because I remember being ostracized too. And the thought of any kid feeling like somebody doesn't love them for whatever wild reason, right? And so there is a moment when an adult has to be an adult. Like I took a call several months ago about a child who identified as a fox, right? I want my kids like running around and dressing up and being maniacs. And also they need an adult in their world to say, you are not a fox, you are a human being. You have to sit down at the table and you can't wear a tail. You see what I'm saying? It's both and. But it starts with an adult saying, I see you and I love you. Come sit down. Versus, let's get to the facts, let's get to the issues. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And so my recommendation to you as a young married guy is that when your wife wants to discuss something and it begins to get emotional, say the following words, I believe you. And just let it hang. Or maybe ask, are you asking for my opinion on this? Or you just want me to sit with you? And if you can get that down 3 years into your marriage, man, you've got a whole different marriage trajectory. Many men treat their wives like car engines, something to be fixed. And it's been my experience. My wife just wants to be heard, man. Most of the time, she's smarter than me anyway. She doesn't need my info. She needs my presence. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
And so if she says, like, hey, I need to know, like, what's our stance on this as a family? All right, well, let's get into the nitty gritty. Here's who we're going to be. And if you say, hey, what do we want people to feel like when they come into our house? Then she's going to be right there with you. But it's getting to the thing beneath the thing. Like, gun means what? For you, it means we're all going to be safe. For her, it means we're going to be very not safe. So let's address what makes us feel safe. When it comes to inclusion, she believes nobody should feel like they don't have a place to go where they belong. And inclusion for you means people got some facts out of order here. So let's get to that deeper part of the conversation. That's the problem with politics right now, is it's all about what team are you on, not about, hey, how do we solve some of these major issues? Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. The thing below the issue.
And let me tell you how, like, ultimately how we manage this in my house. It's just how I teach it all over the country. I want my wife and I to be aligned on our values. Who are we going to be? In the Delony house, anybody is welcome in our house, period. End of story. And my kids have seen a cascade of great, wonderful, amazing, very eclectic people come into our home. Right? That's who we are. And we're also very curious. Curiosity is a thing. We say yes to adventures. That's who the Delonys are. And we have a few principles that we stand on that we will not violate, period. And I want my beliefs about how we get there to change all over the place. Sometimes, like Kelly and I, we both align. We want to help people. We both align in that value. That's why we do this show. I believe you should tell the truth and be kind to people. Kelly believes you should lie a lot and be mean. We both are like, I'm just kidding. She doesn't at all. She's very kind too. But we both have different beliefs on how we're going to accomplish the thing, which is our value, which is we want to love people well. And so that's where we do our debating and negotiating around the beliefs, man, but those values are anchored in there. The exercise you and your wife, I think, would be valuable for y'all to spend some time on is, who are we gonna be? Who do we want to be? What do we want people to feel like when they walk in our house? What kind of home are we building? And then you anchor those value statements in there, man, and your beliefs will begin to backfill. And expect over the course of your marriage, lots of tension around the beliefs. I believe our kids should be able to, I'm just making something up, this isn't me, but I believe our kids should eat at school lunches so that they can be fit in with their peers. I believe a kid should never eat a school lunch because it's mostly toxic sludge, and I'm going to get organic foods. And I believe we should never borrow money. I believe we should borrow money and have the nicest brand new Tahoes in the parking lot. All right, our values are freedom. No one will ever own this family. All right, now we're going to get to the beliefs then. So spend some time with the values part. And then, man, have a fun time in your marriage negotiating and complaining and fighting and debating the beliefs part. That stuff should change a lot. And at the end of the day, this is how I do it in my house. So for whatever it's worth, if my wife draws a red line and says, I can't have this. Let me do something that's silly. My wife said, I cannot have another guitar brought into this home. We have too many. I could say, I make a bunch of money. I can have as many guitars as I want. I need this guitar for this particular sound, for this particular song, for this particular band. I can do all that. If my wife says, I can't have another guitar in this house, she does that so rarely, like every 5 years, 10 years. I'm not bringing another guitar in the house because my covenant to my wife is more important than my ego. And so if my wife, I'm a big hunter. I grew up in the house of a police officer. I've been around guns my whole life. I'm a Texan. And I, just for whatever that's worth. And my wife grew up in the home of an avid outdoorsman. If she came to me and said, this is a no-go forever, period, we're going to have that conversation. Because my commitment to my wife is deeper than my how dare you. And she also knows, hey, my husband hunts a lot. He's out in the woods a lot. Him and his friends do competitive shooting together. I'm not going to draw that red line, but I am going to draw some really thick red lines when it comes to safety in the house. John, you can't leave guns laying around. John, you got to put stuff away. Everything's got to be locked up. So some of those basic safety things, right, that make her feel comfortable. But that's just us being married and managing our values and our beliefs in our home. And every couple is going to be different on those things. But spend some time together locking in those values, man. And then always get to the thing beneath the thing beneath the thing. And often don't try to fix your wife with facts and data unless she asks for it. Unless she asks for it. Most of the time, your wife wants you to sit with her and say, I believe you. It's a wild world we live in, isn't it? And then exhale, and then don't say anything else because your presence often is enough. And then we'll get to the big issues. Thanks for the call, brother.